Today we're going to consider some of the richest blessings that come from working in your garden. Today we're continuing in our Gardening with Carl series as we join Carl in his living room to hear how gardening has blessed him spiritually. I think you'll be inspired as he shares how gardening relates to our creation and our Creator. But I believe you'll also find deeply touching the testimony that he shares of how God has revealed himself to him in his own gardening experience, especially as it relates to how to grow sweet potatoes. Let's listen as Carl shares.
I'd like to bring this to a close with this segment by sharing with you something about gardening that is probably the most important thing to me personally. I find gardening one of the most spiritually satisfying experiences that I've ever done. After all, when you open your Bible, you start with a garden. In fact, when God created man, his first home was actually a garden. Imagine it. You know, we don't stop to think sometimes how special that must have been. I would love to live in a garden if, we didn't have to put up with mosquitoes and bugs and creepy crawly things, but I can't imagine that Adam and Eve had that to deal with. That living in a garden, you would have the sweet scent of the flowers, and you would have the inspiration of birds singing, the symphony of the out-of-doors. You would hear all of this, the air, moving amongst the pine needles, and it just would be so special. But when I go into my garden, I find myself really feeling close to the Lord. I sense that it's part of creation itself. When I plant a seed and I realize what's in that little seed, that very small little seed, and what it's going to do, I can't help but think of a Creator. And then, having studied about what Jesus revealed to us about God, I just think that in the garden, I find Jesus to be my friend. And I want to encourage you that when you garden, don't think about how hard it is to use the hoe or to dig a hole or whatever it is. Sometimes we do, and I agree. I come in and the next morning I don't walk so very straight, but I just want to tell you that the garden can be one of the most spiritually satisfying experiences in your life. And you can take that initiative to make it that way. When you go in the garden, just say a little prayer, kneel by your plants, pray over them, and ask God for that special wisdom that will enlighten you, that will broaden your whole paradigm of what's happening there, that it is a miracle. It is an amazing miracle when you are in the garden witnessing the very creative power of God. And to think that you're doing it and then having the benefit of eating what you grow. I just want to encourage you to not fail to experience that wonderful experience that awaits you when you go into your garden. I think of that song, "I come to the garden alone, where the dew is still on the roses." And the voice, you hear that voice of God as the wind sows through the leaves. You just sense the presence of God. It's a wonderful thing. And it's there. It's there. I feel it, when I'm out there now. When I started praying in my garden some years ago, when I started making it strictly a spiritual experience, it just took all of the labor out of it. But I find an inordinate number of times that it seems to me God is in constant communication with me when it comes to my forgetfulness, for instance, my misplacing things. I find that as I get older, that I forget things, I misplace things. Just yesterday, I was wishing that I could find out if my compost pile was hot, you know. I couldn't find that thermometer, and I knew I'd misplaced it someplace. So I went down there and I prayed about it, you know. I do this, of course, anytime I lose things. I do a lot of praying about that. But God, so often, you know, like yesterday, and I've learned to pray recognizing that it's strictly in His purview, you know. I mean, it's not something that I demand that God do. I will be just the same as if I don't find it. That too is good. And so yesterday I thought, Lord, it would be so encouraging, that's the way I'm kind of looking at it right now, if I could find that. And just instantly I felt like, go down to the shop. I thought I'd left it out there somewhere. Go down to the shop. And so I went right down to the shop, and I was praying the whole way, you know, and rejoicing that, you know, the Lord would do what He wanted to do. And I walked in, and I looked way over, and in the corner, and I saw it sticking right out of it, just the little top part of it sticking out of a bucket. I mean, there was stuff everywhere. And I thought, man, how did I just see that? And there's just it's all cluttered down there. You would think I was a hoarder. But there it was. And I said, thank you, Lord. It just makes me feel so good to know that you do this often enough to make me know that I'm so dependent on you, so incredibly dependent.
So when did you start praying over your plants? Was that always been, or did you start that in more recent years?
Well, my dad did, and so it was natural, but no, I got away from it in the sense that I would go out in the garden and never quite think of anything like prayer, you know. It was just, you go out to the garden and work. For many years I did that. This was long after I left my boyhood home. But I would say probably 20 years ago I started really getting serious about the spiritual aspect. And it's been a deeply spiritual experience for me. I just, you know, I love to be out there. I love to be in the midst of what's happening. It's just beautiful. Like when I thought I'd love to grow sweet potatoes. I'd never grown sweet potatoes. This was 3 or 4 years ago. And I said, it's ideal in the hoop house because in the summer it gets hot and you can't just plant everything in there. You can plant okra, you can plant certain things, but man, sweet potatoes would be ideal. You know, I planted peanuts, I planted sweet potatoes, and I made it a matter of prayer. You know, I said, Lord, now I've never done it before. How would be the best way? And I'd like to, you know, expedite this quickly. I don't, you know, because time's passing and I was behind time, really. And it was like the Lord was just speaking to me, you need some perlite to lighten up the soil because this is a root product and they like to spread, you know, they like to move in the soil. Your soil's too compact. And sure enough, I went to Asheville, got 2 great big bags of it, you know, brought it back, mixed it in, took my little tiller and kind of mixed it in the soil. And then I went and bought the plants and I planted them. And it was an experience because they began to grow and I began to have a real problem with voles. You know what voles are? You don't see them because they come out at night, and they utilize the gophers, you know, the moles. They use the mole tunnels to travel in. You don't see them, and so I was having a problem with voles, and I had my very best potato plants were down at this inn for some reason, and I walked in there one morning, and every one of them was chewed down to the nub. Every single one, right down to the nub. And normally you just pull it out, And I said, no, I'm not going to pull it out. It might just have just enough crown that it will, it'll sprout. And so I prayed over it, I prayed over it. I said, Lord, boy, I'd love to not lose all of that, because that's 1/3 of my sweet potatoes. And Father, just whatever your will, I just leave it in your hands. Well, I came out 3 days later, and those little nubs had just grown enough that gave me hope. Well, they grew, and they began to get up, really nice. And I came out there one morning, and they were all eaten down again. The same area. Now, all the rest were growing. They were all spreading out and everything, but this one area was just keep getting devastated by these voles. And 3 times that happened. And finally, I was able to somehow discourage the voles some way. I was doing various things. I was trying different tactics. And I had a device that would create noise down in those, and it would discourage them. So they grew, and it grew, and the vines spread out, but not as much as down there. And I thought, well, surely I'm not going to get very much down here. So I began to harvest them in the latter part of September. And I went down here hoping, to really be encouraged, because I'd find so many big ones, And so I'm making my way down, and I'm getting a lot of sweet potatoes. And they're just, normal size. And once in a while there'd be a big one, great big one, and then I'd go on down. And when I hit this area, I had sweet potatoes big as pumpkins. I mean, it was amazing. I could not figure it out. I thought, how did they do that? Because they didn't have that much time to grow. But, it was just one of those delayed blessings that made me rejoice. I put it on, we pictured them. In fact, Glenda has it on her phone. We've got them on the internet, and I got all kinds of reactions, and I have several doctor friends. One of the doctor friends wrote back, and he says, one's a kidney and one's a liver. Yeah, liver. And they were huge. And what was neat was that they were sweet all the way through. There was nothing wrong with them. They had the same texture all the way through. You would think being big like that something would be wrong. They would be calloused or something, but they weren't.
So do you think, obviously the Lord blessed, but do you think that the fact that it didn't have to put all that energy into the greenery, that created more fruit?
Yes. See, I learned a lot by that, and the end of the story is my son, Bub, had grown them. He said, Dad, you need to be pruning those vines, where they lap way over your grow bed, your grow box. Just cut them, take your weed eater and just go right down the line and do that. I said, yeah, but man, that would just, you mean just, rip out the plant? Yeah. He says, all the energy is going in your plant. And you're right. And so I learned by that. And when I planted them the next year, I didn't, I would trim the plants. And it made sense. So, in the whole process, it took time. The Lord doesn't, He doesn't suit our spoiled natures. He wants us to really trust Him, to really, really trust Him. Good or bad, we live in a very broken world. And we just have to learn to live in a broken world as people whom people can look at and say, look how his attitude is, because, now if God took care of us in a special way, it wouldn't be a witness. If He pampered us, it wouldn't be a witness.
Wow.
it's a witness, because people look and they say, you mean you still trust God when you have to, Yes, I do, because He does so much more than temporal things. He tends to your heart. He tends to your mind. He forms paradigms and thoughts and faith. Faith is so much more than just a word. It's an experience. It's a deep experience, and it's a growing satisfaction with what God gives you and what God allows you to experience.
I hope you found today's segment to be a blessing. For certainly we want rich produce, beautiful vegetables in our garden. But what a blessing if we can grow spiritually in this garden space. I invite you to go out to your garden here soon and bow your head and ask Jesus to garden with you, to go for a walk with Him in your garden. And what a blessing to think that when we invite Him into ours, that one day He will invite us into His. Now, I'm sad to announce this is our last segment in this Gardening with Carl series, but we will hopefully join him again later this summer. So for now, I hope you're blessed, and I hope you'll join us next time as together we explore greener pastures.